Hey guys, it's Camus and another edition of Coffeehouse Chess Openings. Some of you might be surprised to see that I've listed the Berlin Defense as a Coffeehouse Chess Opening, especially since it's got such a reputation as a super serious Grandmaster line. Especially after Kramnik used it to defeat Garry Kasparov in the World Championship match. But I'm going to show you that there are some Coffeehouse opportunities in such a staid line. So let's get into it. 1e4, 1e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, bishop to b5, knight to f6, and this move signals the Berlin defense. Now, normally the move here is castles, and in that case, if you want to take a coffeehouse approach, you can play knight to g4, which is the infamous fishing pole trap. And I've actually done, I think, 7 or 8 videos on the fishing pole because it's a very interesting trap and not all that easy to defeat. With best play, white should be able to get an advantage against it. Of course, any move that moves, anything that involves moving a piece twice in the opening is pretty suspicious here. But briefly, I'll show you that the idea of the trap is something like this. If white tries to eject this knight immediately with h3, then black just calmly plays h5. And furthermore, if white is complete lunatic and tries to take the knight here, he's going to be lost after h takes g2, and it doesn't really matter where the knight retreats to after queen to h4. White is completely busted here. So I'll put a link to one of my videos in the comment section if you're interested in looking further at this very interesting trap. Okay, but that's not really the subject of the video today. We're going to look instead at the move d3, which probably doesn't happen very often in higher level games, although it's certainly been played quite a bit. It's a quiet continuation. The normal move, as I said, is castles. There are actually a number of other Berlin defense sidelines, and Qatar has done a video on the Berlin defense and its sidelines. Perhaps I'll include a link to those as well. Okay, but d3 is a move I've seen actually quite a bit. I think lower rated players get worried about the pressure on their e4 pawn and want to shore it up. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the move. It's fine. Although with just normal play, black should be able to equalize easily. Now, what we're going to talk about today is the Mortimer Trap. So normally black would play d6 here and go into normal equalizing lines, but I'm not going to go into that. Instead, he plays the shocking knight to e7, which is shocking on 2 counts. First of all, we're moving this piece twice in the opening. We're abandoning the defense of the pawn on e4, and we're gumming up the development of the king's bishop. So now, I will say that in contrast to the 2 other Coffeehouse chess openings we've already looked at, the England Gambit and the Blackburn-Schilling Gambit, this looks like a bad move, but it's actually not as bad a move as you might imagine. I'm going to show you how Tony Miles actually used this as his main weapon against the d3 variation in the Berlin defense. We'll look at one of his games later, and he actually revitalized the whole line, and it's an absolutely viable line. So if you play this line, there's very little risk involved, unlike the England and the Blackburn-Schilling, where you're going to get killed if white knows the refutation. Here, you can actually play a decent game of chess, even if even if white doesn't fall into the trap. So let's look at the trap first, and then we'll look at the other continuations if white is eagle-eyed and doesn't fall for it. Okay, so here's the trap. This is, as I said, known as the Mortimer Trap after an amateur who discovered this move. Didn't have very good results with it, but he actually inspired Zukertort to take it up, and other players too. So knight takes e5. If he is grabbing the bait, But now he's going to be lost after c6. And now white has three main replies here. You play bishop to c4, then queen to a5, knight to c3, and we're picking off the knight. And this is the main point of the trap. Let's go back. You can play bishop to a4, but much the same applies here. After knight to c3, we just take the knight. Also note that it's quite possible that your opponent might play bishop to d2, but and then you have a choice of two pieces. It looks like taking either the bishop on a4 or the knight in e5 is totally fine. Rybka expresses a slight preference for taking the knight on e5, so that's probably what I will do if I get this this position. Okay, let's go back. So obviously the bishop retreats do not help white in any way. What he should actually do, even though he's still going to be lost, the best move is knight to c4, and actually he's springing a little bit of a trap here, because if black foolishly continues and takes the bishop on b5, then knight to d6 is checkmate, snap. So we don't want that accident to happen, and to avoid that we will play d6. And now there are two continuations here. Knight to c3 is the line that the computer recommends. Well, let's look at bishop to a4 first. Bishop to a4, b5, and we're forking a piece, forking two pieces with a pawn. So black will end up with a piece for two pawns. The computer line introduces some complications. So let's just briefly take a look at that. If in this position, instead of bishop to a4, he plays a knight to c3, then we go ahead and take the bishop. Knight to b takes b5, knight to g6, bishop to e3, d5, e takes d5, knight takes d5, bishop takes a7, bishop to e7, castles, b6, now we are trapping this bishop, a4, castles, and black has a piece for three pawns. He's much better though, and this bishop on a7 looks a bit dodgy. Rybka gives black a sizable advantage in this position, but it is complicated, so you might want to take a look at this in case it crops up, because it's not just a slam dunk. But I would think that if you're playing this in a blitz game, the majority of your opponents are going to play bishop to a4 here and hang on for dear life. Okay, so that's essentially the Mortimer trap. That's all you need to know to play that. But if they don't fall into the trap, what do you need to know? Let's look at that. So we're going back here. Taking the pawn with the knight we've just seen. That's the Mortimer trap. Now knight to c3 is the theoretical move, and that's what most players who have studied the theory of this position are likely to play. So knight to g6 is the old move, and it's actually playable, but we're going to look at Tony Miles's choice, which is c6. This is what I recommend. c6, bishop to c4 is a normal move, and now queen to a5 was Miles's innovation here, which completely revitalized the line, because the line actually had died out in the 19th century, at the end of the 19th century, incorrectly as it was, because the old line with the earlier knight to g6 turns out is actually quite viable, but this is the better way to go. So I won't look at that. You can refer to the great article on this trap at the Kenilworth Chess Club site. I'll put a link to that in the comments. You can take a look. So, okay, from this position after queen to a5, white has three main replies. Let's take a look at them in turn. Queen to e2 is the line suggested by Fritz, so we should probably look at that. And this kind of sets a trap for black, because b5 here is an unfortunate mistake. It's a natural move, but it loses to knight takes e5, And what can happen here is bishop takes c, excuse me, b takes c4, knight takes c4, queen is attacked, goes to e7, and now e5 is a very good move. And if the knight moves to d5, for instance, then knight to d6 lands black into a lot of hot water here. King to d8, knight to f7, king to e8, knight to d6, check, king to d8, knight c to e4, bishop to a6, knight to f7 check. This is all best play by Rybka. Knight takes h8, queen takes e5, knight to f7, queen to e6, and the knight gets out alive. So we're down an exchange, and we have a horrible position. So don't fall for that one. So let's go back here. In this position instead, and in really all of these similar kind of positions, you want to play h6 as Tony Miles did. It just cuts out all these tactics on the by bishop to g4 or excuse me, bishop to g5 or knight to g5. So an early h6 is advisable here. Now in this position, you could play white could play bishop to d2, queen to c7, d4, d6, and this is completely equal. Okay. Instead of bishop to d2, white can play the thematic d4, but after d6, castles, knight to g6, rook to d1. We're going to achieve an equal position here after something like bishop to e7 or b5. This is all equal, and black is doing absolutely fine here. So let's go back. All right, so that was queen e2. That was the Fritz line on move 6. Excuse me, on move 7. So let's look at bishop to d2. After bishop to d2, queen to c7, and knight to g5 is possible and attractive, but actually black equalizes. After d5, e takes d5, c takes d5, bishop to b3, h6, knight to f3, bishop to e6, castles. And this is completely fine for black, no problems, and he's got a nice center, and he's both sides of the bishop pair, but he's got an open c-file. Things are just fine. After knight to g6, he's got no issues at all. Okay, so instead of knight to g5, d4 is probably the more sane approach. And if we can actually play either e takes d4 or knight to g6 here. It looks like knight to g6 may be a little bit better. Let's just take a quick look at that. Knight to g5, e takes d4, bishop takes f7 check. Looks scary, but black is totally fine. King to e7, knight to e2, knight to e5. The bishop's attacked, so he has to retreat. Bishop to b3, h6, knight goes back. Knight takes e4, knight takes e5, queen takes e5. And black has won a pawn here. Okay, we paid a price for it in terms of our relocated king, but we have good central control, and it's actually playable for both sides. Even though black is up a pawn, and his king is in a weird position, Rybka only gives white about a third of a pawn compensation. So should be no issues playing this line. Okay, so let's go on here. Go back, and we'll follow the game continuation, the Miles's game. In that game, castles was played, h6, and once again, the stopping bishop to g5 or knight to g5 tactics. Miles's opponent played d4. Miles played d6. And now here, Wisochin, who was Miles's opponent, should have played h3. And black would have equalized after knight to g6, bishop to e3, bishop to e7. And there's no problems in this position at all. It's just a game of chess. Instead, Miles's opponent went wrong. This game was from 1997, incidentally. D5. Miles played B5. And now there were two possibilities here. He could have gone to D3. But after B4, knight to E2, C takes D5. Black is a clear advantage. He's up a pawn. And looks set to win this with careful play. Wisochin instead played bishop to B3. And now B4 is a move that sort of springs to mind. And it's totally fine. You could look at play here. Something like this could have happened. C takes D5, E takes D5, knight E takes D5, A3. And we're up a pawn, but white does have some counterplay here. So this is probably what Miles wanted to avoid. Instead, he played C5. His opponent played A4. Miles played B4. And now he should have probably just retreated with a worse position. He should have played knight to E2, where he would have had just a worse position. And but instead he tried to stir things up. Probably the right idea. He tried to create complications with knight to B5, but it's going to cost him his knight to do this. Fortunately, Miles is a fantastic calculator, and he was able to see his way through the complications here. He played knight to G6. Here, another surprising move from white. He played knight takes E5. Perhaps he was hoping for the blunder D takes E5, and then after D6, white escapes from all his problems because this pawn is defended for the meantime, and white is threatening a knight to C7 check. And so he would have escaped, but instead Miles saw this and played the correct knight takes E5. His opponent played F4, is desperately trying to whip up any kind of confusion here. Miles replied with A6, F takes E5, D takes E5, D6, A takes B5, D7 check, bishop takes D7, bishop takes F7. You've got to hand it to white. He's really doing his best. Now here, black could have taken the bishop and be still winning, but Miles decided that king to D8 was perhaps a little safer, so he played king to D8, which is also good. Bishop to E3, bishop to B takes A4. Miles went on to win this in 29 moves. I won't show you the rest of the game because if you go to that Kenilworth chess site, the game is shown there, and I don't want to make this video too long. Okay, well, I hope you found something interesting here. This is actually a line that I'm going to adopt the next time somebody plays D3 against me. And I've already played this a couple of times in Blitz and reaped the rewards of greedy players grabbing this pawn. So in the Mortimer Trap. Anyway, thanks for watching, and probably the next video I'm going to be doing is on the notorious Fred variation, and that is a true low-budget coffeehouse opening, so stay tuned for that. Thank you. Bye-bye.